Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you are new here, you're welcome, and if you're a returning subscriber, you're welcome as well. In today's video, we are going to learn how to draft this Milkmade gown. If this is something you like to learn, kindly watch this video to the end and please subscribe to my channel. So right here is my pattern paper, and I'm going to start by marking my chest line of 7 inches. All right, so I'm going to rule the mark. So after that, I'm going to mark my bust point of 9.5 inches, and then the next thing is to mark my under bust of 13 inches and my waist of 16 inches. So I later extended the waist to be 17 inches when I was cutting it on the fabric. So the waist I used is 17 inches. So I'm just ruling all of the marks together. So the next thing is to mark my chest, my shoulder to shoulder measurement of 7 inches, and I'm going to be stopping at my chest line. So I'll go ahead now and mark all the points together. This is the armhole line. Okay, this is going to become the armhole line. So the next thing now is to determine the neck width of 3 inches and then come down from the shoulder line by 1 inch. Okay, connect the point together, and this is going to be our shoulder slope. So the next thing now is to determine the midpoint of the armhole. All right, and the midpoint is 3 inches, and I will also go in by half an inch to create the armhole curve. So right now I've created the armhole curve. The next thing I'm going to do now is to determine my nipple to nipple measurement, and mine is 7 inches and half of it is 3.5, and I'm going to be marking the 3.5. Now on this shoulder line, I'm going to divide the shoulder line into 2, and half of it is 2 inches. So you can see the mark I made there. So I'm going to connect my nipple to nipple measurements together, and then I'll connect it to that shoulder line. That 2 inches I marked at the shoulder line, I'll also connect it to it. So you should have something like this when you are done. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to mark 1 inch upward from my chest line. Okay, so if you mark it from your shoulder line, I'm going to have, if I'm to mark it from my shoulder line, I'll have 6 inches. Okay, so it depends, the neck depth depend on what you want. All right, so I'm going to be taking half an inch on both sides of this dart. Actually, I did not actually need to draw the dart up to the shoulder line. Okay, I didn't need to draw it up to that. Once you draw it up to your bust point is okay. All right, so I'm going to connect the mark together, and I'll be stopping 1 inch before my bust point. Okay, to be taking 1 inch above my under bust line. Okay, you can see my under bust line, so I'm going 1 inch above my under bust line, just like what I did right here now. All right, so what I'm going to do now is to mark the quarter of my bust first. So from that mark I have there now, I'm going to divide it into 2. All right, so after dividing it into 2, I'm going to mark half of it over there. And so the next thing I'm going to do is to connect all of the points together. Just watch what I'm doing. So I'm going to connect from the under bust to that half mark I did at the armhole area there. Can you see what I did there now? And then I'm also going to connect from the under bust to where I went up by 1 inch on the center front side. So right here is going to be my chest line, my bust line, my under bust line, and the waistline. Okay, so that you don't get confused. So the next thing is to determine the width of the neck. Okay, and what I'm using is 6 inches. So after marking the 6 inches, I'll go ahead and connect the armhole. So once you are done, you should have something like this once you've connected the armhole. So I'll go ahead now and use my marker to highlight all of the marks I did there. All right, so the next thing to do now is to start taking all my measurements. Okay, I'm going to be taking the quarter of my bust measurement plus 1 inch seam allowance, quarter of my under bust measurement plus 1 inch seam allowance, and you can also add the dart intake you're taking away from there. You also add it back to it. You do the same thing for the waistline as well. Okay, the dart you're taking away from the waistline, you need to add it to the side seam. All right, so I'll go ahead now and connect all of the marks together. Now on the waistline, I'll just go up by half an inch. All right, to eliminate that sharp edge at the waistline. So you should have something like this once you are done. So guys, I will go ahead now and cut out the front, and after cutting out the front, I'm not going to be separating the front yet. Okay, I'm going to use it to cut out the back before I separate it, but I'm going to cut out the side that we are not going to use at the front. So when I was drafting I mistakenly separated this. Okay, but when you are doing yours, make sure you don't separate it. So right now I'm leaving 1 inch for zipper allowance for the back. Okay, so you can see that I'm now trying to pin it down because I went ahead to separate it. So when you're making yours, don't separate it. So after marking your your 1 inch zipper allowance at the back, you're also going to remove the zipper bulge. You can see how I'm measuring it. Half an inch zipper bulge, you'll be removing it from the waist upward. All right, so right now I'm going to extend all the marks I have at the front. I'm also going to be placing them at the back as well. You can see what I'm doing. I'm also marking where I have the dart at the front. I'm also going to be marking it on the pattern paper so that when I'm cutting the back, I'll also know where to take the dart at the back. So right now I'll start connecting all of the marks together. Okay, so after connecting the marks together, the next thing I'm also going to do is to connect where I have marked as the back dart. All right, so after marking the back dart, I'm also going to be taking 1 inch. I'm going to be taking half an inch on both sides of the dart. Okay, so I'm just connecting the armhole right now. So like I said, I'm going to be taking half inch on both sides for the back dart, and I'll connect it up to the chest line. So when you are sewing your darts, you're going to be stopping at the chest line. So right here now, I'm going to be taking all the measurements, all the horizontal measurements for the bust, the waist, and the under bust. All right. So after that, from the neck area, I'll just come down by 1 inch for the neck, for the back neck depth. Okay, I don't want it to be straight, so that is why I'm coming down by 1 inch, and I'm going to connect it together. So this is all for the back, and once you cut out the back, you should have something like this. So I'm also curving the lower part of the back just like we did for the front. All right, so after cutting, you should have something like this, and you're going to be adding half an inch seam allowance for the lower part of the back and 1 inch seam allowance for the upper part of the back, so that I can use it to fold the back neck. So you do the same thing for the front as well. You had 1 inch at the upper part of this part of the front and half an inch all around this part. Remember, that part is going to be folded. Now at the back, I'm adding 1 inch. Like I said, I'm going to use that 1 inch to fold the back neck, since I don't want to use bias. All right, and the lower part too, I'm also adding sewing allowance to the lower part of the back, and I'll go ahead and cut it out. So make sure you also notch where you're going to have your dart. All right, since I'm not cutting the dart out, I'm going to be stitching it on the fabric, so I'm notching where I'm going to be stitching. So this part, while I was cutting, I didn't fold the dart. So what that means is I'm going to be taking the dart on the fabric, and I'm going to notch where I'm going to be taking the dart. And you can see that I added seam allowance all around the pattern, aside the sides, the side where I already added the side seam. So this part of the front is going to have a ruche, and I'm going to slash the front. You can see I'm labeling the front. Now when you are folding your fabric, make sure your fabric is on fold, because we are only cutting half of this paper. Okay, so when you are placing it on your fabric should be on fold. All right, so the upper part of this pattern, I'm going to be adding 1 inch, because the upper part is going to have the rope that will ruche this part together. So that was why you will need to add 1 inch to the upper part, and then half an inch to the lower part of this pattern. Now the side that falls to the armhole area, you can see I did not add ruche allowance to it, because I don't want the armhole area to be gathered. Okay, so that was why I did not create any space in between it. So on the folded part, which is the center front, I'm going to open it up like this. Okay, according to the picture, the front is going to have an opening, and I'm going to be stitching this part by 1 inch. So after stitching by 1 inch, you go ahead and fold it half an inch twice, and then you stitch it down. Now from the rope casing allowance I left, I'll also come down by 2 inches. So when I'm stitching these two pieces together, all right, I'm not going to stitch the rope allowance and also that 2 inches. All right, so in my next video I'm going to teach us how to create this gown to look like this. All right, so I'll see you guys in my next video. Make sure you watch my next video, guys.